What I want to move to next, Ben, is something that I'm not hearing in uh, in the networks at all. Eric Reed, who famously knelt with Colin Kaepernick and was also sort of kicked to the curb a little bit, but he was able to get picked up where Colin wasn't, was talking about race norming. And what happened, we found out in in a lawsuit that had to do with the settlements for brain injuries, was that when it was coming time to pay out the settlements, that they were using um, cognitive skill measurements to determine how damaged you were, the amount of damage you were. So let's say that, well, I normally, when on any cognitive test, score 100, right? Then I have a brain injury, and now on that same test, I score 30. So I've dropped 70 points. So that really indicates serious injury. And then that lawsuit, that the amount that you get was relative to that amount of injury. So race norming is where in the settlement process, when it came time to determining how much injury there was, the NFL used race norming, which then looked at the cognitive skill levels of Black people versus, we'll say, white people, or we'll say the general population. I'm going to say white. They said whites here. And because the lower number, because Black people actually have been testing lower on those cognitive tests, and that's something I'll show you in a minute, they use those lower norms. So then the amount of damage was reduced. So instead of it going from here to here, it only went from here to here. So then your settlement is that much smaller. Did I kind of make sense there?
You kind of make sense. You obviously know more about this than I do, but just from the little that I thought I knew and from your explanation, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed for the NFL for doing something like that. That's horrible, bro. That's disgusting. I don't care if they took every white player and every Black player and gave them all the same exact test, and every Black player tested less than every white player. I don't care. If I get a brain injury from playing this game and I'm trying to make a settlement and I'm due some compensation, I should get the same compensation as the other person. Screw that. Because guess what? And this might sound crazy. I'm about to say something crazy. Okay? Is it possible that you can look at this two ways? If my cognitive test score is lower than yours, so I drop 30 points where you drop 50 points, does that mean I already wasn't as smart as you? Or does that mean that your injury was worse than mine? Or does that mean that my brain handled the injury better than yours? Which of those does that mean?
Well, first off,
So you can't say a black person is not as smart as a white person, therefore the white person should get more money because the damage was more severe because they went from being smart to being, you know, really damaged, where the black person wasn't that smart to begin with. Basically, that's what race norming is saying. Is that correct? That sucks.
The interesting thing
That
here,
sucks.
the interesting thing is that the concept of this normalization actually was introduced by the federal government and was part of that whole affirmative action thing.
Of course it was.
So then, because in actuality, and I looked it up, what you're looking at here is an article, The Black-White Test Score Gap. Now, this was written a few years back. This is in the archive pages of the New York Times. And African Americans scored lower than European Americans on vocabulary, reading, and mathematical tests, as well as on tests that claim to measure scholastic aptitude and intelligence. I remember reading in the book by Dr. Kunjufu Kwanzaa, The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, that he talked about Black boys testing on par with every other group up to about 4th grade. He called it the 4th grade syndrome. He said, and after that, our test scores vary lower, on the lower end of the racial, of the different races. We scored lower on those tests. And they're bringing this point up and they're trying to figure out why, but the why right now is not where I want to dig into. Just the fact that that is a number that is out there. And so the interesting thing, and that's what the point that Mr. Reed was bringing up, was that this was done to offset racism, and then somehow they switched it around and used it as a racist tool, you know? But when you think about it, it kind of almost, if it made sense on the affirmative action piece, is it that much more egregious to have used it in this piece? That's a question. So Benny, let's take a quick look here. This is from Yahoo Sports, talking about this particular situation. The NFL vows to halt practice of using lower cognitive baseline for Black players and brain injury claims. And so one of the things that was interesting is that it does mention the former NFL players Najee Davenport and Kevin Henry, who filed the lawsuit. And the other interesting thing is that this lawsuit, there was one gentleman's name that came up here in the lawsuit, in which they, as a part of this lawsuit, they had accepted this concept of race norming as a part of the settlement. And there was a gentleman here named, last name of Seeger. I'm looking for his, Christopher Seeger, okay, is acting, is the player representative for the people in this settlement, representing about 20,000 retired NFL players in the brain injury settlement. So this is a large number of people who are going to be affected by this. Ultimately, he sort of supported the concept, and now he's saying that he's sorry for the pain this episode has caused Black former players and their families.
Is he Black?
I don't know. So now they have a new evaluation plan, the NFL, and the norms are going to be overseen by 2 women and 3 Black doctors on the panel, and they're going to propose a new testing regime. But it was very interesting. I think what interested me most about this was simply the fact that I had to go back and I had to look at where we stood relative to the facts of this. So what we were looking at, Ben, is, like I said, an archived version of a New York Times article that's attempting to explain the difference in the scores. You know, it's funny, I actually have something that I posted on my Facebook page this week, and it said basically that genetic research has shown us that we are 99 and like 0.99% identical. And that 1.01% has nothing to do with race or anything like that. Is, you know, so we're genetically identical, but for some reason, we tend as Black people to not test as well and to test lower on these cognitive scores. And like I said, this was being used during the time when they were attempting to help Black people get jobs and things of that nature, affirmative action. So they would use race norming to make your test scores look better, because rather than comparing them to the higher norms, they compared it to the lower norms, so your test score looked better. But that got changed around with the NFL, and now what the NFL is saying is, okay, if you had a brain injury and you had a reduction in your cognitive capabilities, should we measure that reduction from the standardized white score or the standardized Black score? So we kind of took it when it was helping us, but now it's not helping us anymore, and it looks really, really bad. And I feel like it's bad. I think the NFL finally said, in this environment that we're in, we need to, we need to try to fix that. But there is an issue. And like I said, Dr. Kunjufu Kwanzaa stated that after the 4th grade, our test scores diverge from the white children and after the 4th grade. So there's something going on. It was being used against us by the NFL, but it no longer is. And it should mean that when they go back and revisit the settlements that were reduced, because when they brought the norm down, the deficit seemed smaller. So that settlement was smaller. Now that they bring it back up and measure it against the standard, that differential should be paid back to them. But this is a story, like I said, you listen to the NFL channel, you listen to ESPN, I really haven't heard much on the news about this.
The news has plenty more to talk about. If you bring this on, things are going to get even crazier than they already are. First of all, I was unaware of this, I'm sorry to say. And now that I'm aware of it, from what I'm hearing, somebody dropped the ball. Somebody either wasn't informed that there was a possibility that something like this could happen as far as the discrepancies between the settlements because of some cognitive tests that were taken by some study group or something that had nothing to do with the specific people with the brain injuries. But as soon as you start saying things like that, I'm saying, whoa, wait, oh, stop. No, that's no good. You can't base my brain injury from playing this game on some test scores that a group of people took in the 4th grade or the 6th grade or the 8th grade. No, it's not going to happen. And just the fact that what you mentioned about that doctor who said that there was a divergence after 4th grade, let's look at the way children are taught in predominantly Black schools as opposed to predominantly white schools. This is too easy. Somebody dropped the ball. Somebody let this slide. And
I would say, Benny, that it's
that this was okay, and now all of a sudden it's not okay. This is not no all of a sudden thing. Somebody let this slide.
Well, the gentleman Seeger, who represented all 20,000 of those people in the settlement,
he's apologizing, isn't he?
He's apologizing now.
Okay.
Like I said, the conundrum is that when it helps, it's one thing, and when it hurts, it's another thing. I'm about as
When the test scores are used for one thing, it's one thing. And when the test scores are used for another thing, it's another thing.
But that was Eric Reed's point, that it should not have been used in that manner.
I agree with him 100%.
You know, but again, it was not without some level of scientific precedent. And so that's the interesting, to me, the interesting conundrum of this particular situation. I'm glad to see that it's being redone, that they're revisiting this, that they're going to correct this and put everybody on a normal, standardization in terms of the measurement of their deficiencies. That should help out. All right. Mr. Dickerson, I want to give you a minute.
Well, I got one more thing to say.
Uh-oh.
Did you see the movie Blue Chips?
I'm sorry?
Did you see the movie Blue Chips? Pretty sure it came out like in the late 90s or the early 2000s. The great philosopher Leon Boudreaux, one of his famous lines in the movie is, "The SATs are culturally biased." I think he spoke for me and a lot of other people out there. Okay, I agree 100%. Leon Boudreaux.
The interesting thing as far as that is concerned is that for those Black children who are knocking the SAT out of the park, it shows that within their educational experience, that cultural bias can be overcome big time.
Yes, that's exactly
what it's not happening either in the school or at home. Because I know with my kids, I did not depend on just what they learned in school.
Right.
I can tell you, it's very interesting.
But that doesn't mean it's okay, though.
Well, see, this is the problem. Nothing's perfect. There's bias built into everything, whether we want to or not, just because we're human and we are inherently biased. So that becomes a challenge, and I see it play out all over the world between different cultures. In the United States, we have the particular Black-white attention that goes on because of our history. So I see it play out there, but it happens everywhere. And again, if you go back and take some opportunity to read that New York Times article, you'll see that the article was about how to fix that problem and the challenge of fixing the problem. So number one, it acknowledged the problem, and number two, it was talking about ways to fix it. And that's what we have to do. That is the bigger picture. Whatever that divergence is, we need to get that up here so that our children are testing at the norms of their Caucasian counterparts. So that's what's the bigger picture here, and that we really have to focus on. So I'm glad to see the NFL slowly. Ben, you and I pointed out so many times things that we felt was inherently racist in the NFL. So we know that situation, even when it came down to the support of the former president, we knew what was there, especially as you got out to the teams themselves and to the team owners.
Correct.
Because there's only one Black team president in the 100-year history of the NFL. And he just got the job with Washington like last year.
Right.
So we saw that happen, and we've talked about that. We've been on that. All right.
Check out Ben and Barry on football. What you need to know when you need to know it. Tune in Fridays, 6 to 7:30 p.m.